A student submitted a solution to this problem to me, and I wanted to go over that solution and look at the way it was done and show some of the errors that were done in that calculation, and then show the correct way to do it over here. So let's start by looking at the way to multiply two numbers together correctly. The student lined them up with the last digits lined up together. That's the way to do it. Doesn't matter where the decimal point is, just make sure the last two digits are lined up. We begin by taking this number here, 6, multiplying by 7. That's what the student did. Since they got 42, they put a 2 below the 6 and 7. And then they carried a 4. The 4 of the 42 they carried. And they put it over here. Next, they took this arrow here, and this time they multiplied 6 times 5. 6 times 5 was 30, so they put a 0 below, and they carried the 3. The 3 they put over here. The 6 was multiplied by the 4, and they went 6 times 4, and they put a 4 at the bottom because it was 24. So a 4 went at the bottom, and they carried the 2. And that was the answer they had for their first row, 402. Let me show you the way to do this properly. This is not a correct answer. Let me show you over here how to do this answer correctly. The first part was correct. You do multiply 6 times 7. And the student also got that correct. There's a 2 that goes at the bottom. That's correct. And we do carry the 4. But the 4 does not go above the 7. The 4 goes in this column, in the next column over. So the 4 should go over here. Now we go ahead and multiply 6 times 5. So the student multiplied 6 times 5, they got 30, and they put a 0 below. That's not correct. When we multiply 6 times 5, we do get 30, but then we have to add the 4 onto the 30. This carried 4 has to be added to the 30. So instead of a 0 going below, a 4 goes below. And we carry the 3 of the 34. The 3 goes above this next column. Now we multiply the 6 by the 4. 6 times 4 is 24. The student did that, but they put a 4 below. You first, however, have to add the carried 3 from the last multiplication. So 6 times 4 is 24. Add the 3, and at the bottom, we put 27. So the entire number 27 goes to the bottom because we've come to the end. We've come to the end of the row. We've multiplied by 7 and by 5 and by 4. There's no other number to multiply by beside the 4. So the entire number 27 will go to the bottom. And so this would be the correct first row, 2742. Now let's look at the student's second row. This time, correctly, they multiplied the 8. They started with the 8, and they multiplied by the 7. They did this correctly. So they did 8 times 7. They got 56. So they put a 6 on the bottom. And then incorrectly, they carried the 5 and they put the 5 up here. Their next step was to multiply 8 times 5, and they got 40, so they put a 0 below. And the 4, the carried 4, they put above here. Finally, They multiplied 8 times 4, and they got 32. So they put the 2 below. And they carried the 3 above. Notice they never added the carried 3. They just put them on top. Let's see the correct way of doing it over here. They were correct in that they were going to begin by multiplying 8 times 7. That's correct. But before we do that multiplication, we have to add a placeholder 0 below the 2. When we do multiplication by a 3-digit number times another 3-digit number, the first digit we multiply each of the numbers as we did below here. But when we get to the second digit, this 8, we first have to put a 0 here to hold the space. And then we can begin multiplying. So now 8 times 7 is 56. So 6 goes at the bottom. But then we carry the 5 over here in the next column. So 8 times 7 is 56. 6 goes at the bottom. The 5 goes above this next column, this next digit. Now we multiply 8 times 5. And we get 40, as the student got. 8 times 5 is 40. They put a 0 below. But they forgot to add the 5. The carried 5 has to be added. So 8 times 5 is 40, plus the 5 is 45. So a 5 goes below. And we carry the 4. Next, we're going to multiply 8 times 4. That's 32. But we have to add the carried 4, giving us 36. And then just as before, since we got to the end of the number, we put the entire result, the 36, at the bottom. When we go to our next row, when we multiply 1 times 7 and 1 times 5 and 1 times 4, we first have to add, this time, 2 placeholder zeros. So for each row that goes on, another 0, another placeholder 0 gets added onto the row. So this time it's 2 rows. If there had been a third row, there would be 3 zeros. But now we just put 2 zeros. So now we have to multiply. I'm going to get rid of this arrow for a moment. I'm going to multiply 1 times 7, 1 times 4, and 1 times 5. And that's what the student did. They did the same numbers. They had the same numbers below here. But they forgot to add a placeholder 0. So they did 1 times 7, 1 times 4, and 1 times 5. And they didn't add those placeholder zeros. So they didn't line up properly. So let's find the solution now. We're going to put a line under here. And we're going to add these rows. So 2 plus 0 is 2. 4 and 6 is 10. So we put a 0 at the bottom. And we carry the 1. Now 1 plus 7 plus 5 plus 7. 1 plus 7 is 8. 8 plus 5 is 13. 13 plus 7 is 20. So another 0 goes at the bottom. And we carry a 2. So 2 plus 2 is 4. Plus the 6 is 10. Plus a 5 is 15. So a 5 goes at the bottom. We carry a 1. 1 plus 3 plus 4 is 8. And so this digit is an 8. Over here, the student added everything correctly. When they came to this step, they added 2 plus 6 is 8, plus 7 is 5, so they had a 5 on the bottom. They carried the 1 properly. So 2 plus 6 was 8, plus 7 is 15. They carried the 1. The 1 plus the 5 is 6. That was correct. And then finally, at the end here, they had 4 plus 2 plus 4 is 10. So this was the solution they came to. And then it was time for them to add the decimal point. For the very last step of the solution, you're supposed to add the decimal place to the answer. When the student did this, I'm thinking that they looked at the original numbers being multiplied and noticed that there was 1 decimal point. The decimal point was 1 space before the end in each of the 2 numbers. And so they concluded that the decimal point should be put between the 6 and the 5, which would be 1 place before the end of the number. That's not the correct way to figure out where the decimal point should go. This is the way that you need to do it. You need to look for how many digits are after the decimal place in total in the 2 numbers that are being multiplied. So in 45.7, there's 1 digit after the decimal point. In 18.6, there's also 1 digit after the decimal point. So there's a total of 2 digits after the decimal point. That tells us to put the decimal point 2 spaces from the end. If there were 3 digits after the decimal point, we'd put 3 digits, a total of 3, we'd put 3 digits from the end. But here there's a total of 2 digits after the decimal point. So it tells us to add the decimal point here, 2 spaces from the end. So the correct solution would be 850.02.